The Two Gentlemen of Verona is an oddity among Shakespeare's plays, in that it is the only play to feature two men in its title. Three play titles feature a man and a woman, and focus on the ultimately tragic love stories of Romeo and Juliet, Antony and Cleopatra, and Troilus and Cressida. One other play features more than one woman in its title, The Merry Wives of Windsor, but this is the only play to imply, through its title, that the friendship dynamic, the bond between two men, would be of major significance. And so it proves. The Two Gentlemen of Verona tells the story of two friends, Valentine and Proteus, who are separated early on in the play. Think of what happens to many gap year students. Some work for a while before heading off to see the world. Others have been dating the love of their life since year Z, and so stay put and stagnate. In this play, it is Proteus, in love with Julia, who wants to remain in Verona, whilst Valentine wants to see the wonders of the world abroad, or at least spend some time cavorting in Milan. However, in Milan, Valentine, as befits his name, rapidly falls in love with the Duke's daughter, Sylvia. She reciprocates Valentine's love, but is hampered by her father believing that the foolish idiot Curio would be a far more appropriate choice. Things get a little murkier, however, when Proteus arrives in Milan, having been sent there by his quick-fire father to be tried and tutored in the world. Proteus does gain more experience of life, but not perhaps the kind that his father had in mind. With Julia out of sight, she becomes out of mind, and the young courtier falls in love with Sylvia, the same Sylvia so beloved of his friend Valentine. Proteus's treachery is staggering as he successfully gets his friend banished, or vanished as his servant Lance labels it, in a glorious malapropism, before trying every trick in the book to win Sylvia over, in front of a disguised and horrified Julia, who has come to Milan to see her supposedly loving Proteus. There is a dramatic climax as, away from the city court, Valentine witnesses his friend's betrayal and attempted rape of Sylvia. Caught red-handed, Proteus has no option but to apologise and beg forgiveness. Valentine not only forgives his friends, but offers to give up all his claims to Sylvia so Proteus can get stuck in instead. Fortunately, Julia intervenes at this point and quickly removes her male disguise, which results in a restoration of the original Valentine with Sylvia and Proteus with Julia relationships. Curio conveniently relinquishes his claim. A murky world indeed, in which friendships between men and relationships between men and women come head to head. So, let's explore the curious, delicate relationships between love and friendship in Shakespeare's The Two Gentlemen of Verona. This is Schofield on Shakespeare. At the beginning of the play, Valentine and Proteus certainly seem fond of each other, as shown in noun phrases such as "my loving Proteus" and disbelieving rhetorical questions such as "wilt thou be gone, sweet Valentine?" However, their friendship is not strong enough to keep them together when they clearly currently have differing ambitions and desires. Valentine's opening speech mildly rebukes his love-struck friend and suggests that his life consists of living duly sluggardized at home, and that he may well wear out thy youth with shapeless idleness. The glorious past participle, sluggardized, suggests that Proteus has become lazy, prone to relative passive inactivity, like the unappealing image of a prostrate slug clinging stubbornly to the ground, something he believes is not right for a young man. Valentine's image of youth is clearly one which involves masculine exertion, energetic actions and travel. He believes that your early years as a young adult should not be spent slumping morbidly around doing very little but ruminating and despairing, which of course are classic symptoms of the as yet unrequited and unmarried man in love. So Proteus and Valentine's friendship is temporarily put on hold due to the former's feelings of love, meaning he has no intention of leaving Verona. and Proteus's soliloquy after his friend leaves the stage reveals that the early stages of love can have other, not necessarily healthy consequences. He ruminates, "I leave myself, my friends, and all for love. Thou, Julia, thou hast metamorphized me, made me neglect my studies, lose my time, war with good counsel, set the world at naught." Proteus's choice of vocabulary is revealing. He claims Julia has metamorphized him. Metamorphosis is the process by which some insects and animals completely transform themselves when they develop into adults. For example, tadpoles change into frogs and caterpillars become butterflies. Proteus's verb suggests that the effect of falling in love with a beautiful woman has utterly changed not just his feelings, but his entire personality, even appearance. However, this change, a natural one as Proteus himself moves from childhood and adolescence into an adult, has had numerous negative side effects. He no longer values aspects of his existence such as studying, arriving on time to meet people, good advice from others. He no longer cares about anything outside his narrow, amorous hopes and desires for the future. He sets the world at naught. But such description of the early melancholic stages of love is not unusual in life or indeed Shakespeare. Think of the tricked Beatrice and Benedict in Much Ado About Nothing, the silently despairing Viola in Twelfth Night, or the embarrassingly witless Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream. However, what is more interesting in Shakespeare's treatment of love in The Two Gentlemen of Verona is not so much Proteus's initial pessimism, but Julia's early reactions to his protestations of great love. In Act 1, Scene 2, Julia first begs her waiting woman Lucetta to hand over Proteus's love letter, but then rips it into several pieces, before alone repenting of her actions. Picking up bits of torn letter, she censures herself. "Look, here is writ, kind Julia, unkind Julia, as in revenge of thy ingratitude, I throw thy name against the bruising stones, trampling contemptuously on thy disdain." Julia clearly regrets tearing up Proteus's letter, and her language suggests that she feels she is only harming herself by doing so, as well as being ungrateful towards the man who is prepared to demonstrate his love for her. Referring to a scrap of paper which has her name written on it, she points out the incongruity of her throwing a representation of herself onto the ground. The bruising stones. By doing so, she is only going to trample on herself, express contempt and scorn for herself. The logic is clearly that a love letter to yourself contains much praise, compliments and kind words. By disrespecting that love letter, you are only disrespecting yourself. Perhaps it is Julia's immaturity and inexperience in the world of love that cause her to rip up something which she desperately wants to read. Nonetheless, Shakespeare does show the importance of love to young people, especially women, and how impulsive, irrational reactions to love tokens can result in feelings of self-loathing. Julia addresses her own hands dramatically immediately after tearing up the latter. "Oh, hateful hands, to tear such loving words! Injurious wasps, to feed on such sweet honey and kill the bees that yield it with your stings." These words show Julia figuratively labelling her fingers as killer wasps who are happy to help themselves to sweet things, yet either kill or fail to show the due kindness to the manufacturers of such sweet things, either bees or love letter writers. Love may cause a great deal of turbulent, introspective thoughts, but Shakespeare shows how society and elder family members consider that it doesn't bring about a sufficient understanding of the world for a young man keen to progress and advance. Antonio, the love-struck Proteus's father, decides to send his son to Milan because he cannot be a perfect man not being tried and tutored in the world. Experience is by industry achieved. Proteus himself confesses in Act 1, Scene 1, that his fixation with Julia has made him set the world at naught, and as far as his father is concerned, this makes him immature, imperfect. A noble man is one who has experienced the wider world before being ready to commit to love and enroll in a lifetime course of marriage. It is therefore ironic that the man he is sending his son to in Milan, his friend Valentine, has been left similarly paralysed and sluggardised by the debilitating consequences of initially unrequited love. It is Valentine's page Speed who reveals to the audience how his master has been metamorphized by love. just as Rosaline mocks Orlando's apparent lack of love in As You Like It by pointing out that his sleeve should be unbuttoned, your shoe untied, and everything about you demonstrating a careless desolation. So Speed likewise reels off a huge list of classic in-love symptoms and tells his master in Act 2, Scene 1, "First, you have learnt, like Sir Proteus, to reave your arms like a malcontent, to relish a love song like a robin redbreast, to walk alone like one that has the pestilence, to sigh like a schoolboy that had lost his ABC." The tone of Speed's words is precociously jaunty, and it is clear that he is gently ribbing Valentine for the utter conventionality of his reaction to love. He uses repeated similes to compare a single aspect of his behaviour to something else, including a bird, a schoolboy, and someone with a serious infectious disease, a pestilence. And in doing so, he is drawing attention to the artificiality of his master's learned behaviour. He's more like an animal or an immature youngster than a sophisticated adult or the man about town he desires to be. So Shakespeare shows how those in love can behave utterly predictably, and from the outside such behaviour can seem contrived and artificial. People in love become so obsessed about the object of their desire that they don't always realise that other people don't share their hyperbolic enthusiasm. Indeed, such obsessive focus on love about anything and everything else allows a comparison to be made between lovers and those seriously ill. As Speed points out, your follies shine through you like the water in a urinal, that not an eye that sees you, but is a physician to comment on your malady. In Shakespeare's times, a urinal was a container used by medical practitioners to inspect the urine of the ill. According to Speed, Valentine's foolish behaviour as a lover can be as easily spotted as discoloured urine signifying sickness can be identified by a doctor. Shakespeare shows how you can spot those people that are sickeningly overwhelmed with their newly acquired passionate feelings. It is horribly and nauseatingly obvious. One aspect of love that Shakespeare enjoys toying with in his comedies is the frequent disparity between professions of everlasting devotion and subsequent actions. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, for example, Lysander says goodnight to his beloved Hermia and responds to her pledge for his love never to alter with the lusty rhyming couplet, "Amen, amen, to that fair prayer say I, and then end life when I end loyalty." Yet the following morning, he has abandoned the same woman and headed off in quest of another, previously far less desirable woman, Helena. In a similar way, Proteus vows to remain faithful forever to Julia in Act 2, Scene 2 of the Two Gentlemen of Verona, as he responds to her socially subversive present of a ring with the staunchly committed lines, "Here is my hand for my true constancy, and when that hour overslips me in the day wherein I sigh not, Julia, for thy sake, the next ensuing hour some foul mischance torment me for my love's forgetfulness." Whereas Lysander dramatically talks of dying should he prove unfaithful in his love towards Hermia, Proteus talks of being terribly punished should he merely forget to sigh or think of his dear Julia. Yet as soon as he arrives in Milan, these words appear as a forgotten dream, and unlike Lysander, Proteus hasn't the excuse of having had exotic love flower extracts applied to his eyes by a naughty Puck-esque figure. Shakespeare shows how the great passions inspired by feelings of love can lead you to making the grandest of statements, which are actually incredibly difficult to live up to. As humans, we are changeable, whimsical creatures, apt without firm discipline to be attracted elsewhere at the drop of a hat. It is in Act 2, Scene 4 that Proteus makes his grand entrance in Milan and rapidly falls in love with Valentine's sweet lady, Sylvia. However, before he arrives on stage, Shakespeare gives Valentine an opportunity to talk about his friendship with Proteus to the Duke of Milan. His words are gushing indeed and give an insight into the warmth of their friendship that hasn't been evident during their early exchanges on stage. He reveals that from our infancy we have conversed and spent our hours together, and concludes in a spouting waterfall of effervescent piffle, Sir Proteus has made use and fair advantage of his days, his years but young, but his experience old, his head unmellowed, but his judgment ripe. Much of this is clearly untrue. Back in Act 1, Scene 1, Valentine implied his friend wasn't making good use of his days by describing him as wearing out thy youth with shapeless idleness. Furthermore, whereas in As You Like It, subsequent acts of self-sacrifice and relentless companionship bear out Celia's claim that she and Rosaline slept together, rose at an instant, learned, played, eat together. The audience watching The Two Gentlemen of Verona will be less convinced about Valentine and Proteus having been inseparable from their respective cradles. Shakespeare is illustrating a common truth, that friendships matter deeply to us, that we want other people, especially those in influential positions, to like and respect our friends, and by extension ourselves for having made and maintained such close, mutually rewarding relationships. Valentine can be excused such an exuberant, exaggerated description of Proteus, faced with the intimidating presence of someone of a significantly higher social status than himself. It is also natural to express enthusiasm about a friend you haven't seen for some time. However, seconds after arriving on stage, this same friend falls in love with Valentine's own loved one, bringing for a second time direct conflict between friendship and love. Alone together on stage for the first time in Milan, Valentine and Proteus have the opportunity to renew their friendship. After they both inquire about each other's nearest and dearest, Valentine shows either his closeness to Proteus or reinforces the idea that lovers are incapable about talking about anything other than their own passions, by explaining how his life and philosophy have altered. Following Proteus's reflection that his own tales of love will want to weary Valentine, his friend reveals, "I, Proteus, but that life is altered now. I have done penance for contemning love, whose high imperious thoughts have punished me, with bitter fast, with penitential groans." Just as Benedict in Much Ado About Nothing moves swiftly from a position of "I will live a bachelor" to being horribly in love with Beatrice, something he justifies by asking, "Does not the appetite alter?" So Valentine makes a similarly dramatic shift from disinterested skeptic to your conventional head-over-heels romantic. He personifies love, which he believes has unpleasantly proud, imperious thoughts. He argues that by being made to fall utterly in love with Sylvia, he is being punished for not acknowledging love's potential power. This causes him to suffer and seek love's pardon by showing he recognises he was wrong for dismissing its potency. And so Shakespeare is revealing the suddenness of love and how it can transform with one fell swoop the lives and feelings of those who might consider themselves immune from its influence. Shakespeare is also indicating once again that the early stages of love can wreak havoc upon other areas of your life. Just as Proteus in Act 1, Scene 1 revealed in a soliloquy that love had left him neglecting his studies, not valuing his friends, and even feeling displaced from his own identity, so Valentine confesses openly to his friend, and in doing so shows his trust and faith in him, that love have chased sleep from my enthralled eyes and made them watchers of mine own heart's sorrow. Once again, love is personified and made the subject of the sentence. It is presented as an all-powerful being that can immobilize humans, and in this case it has left poor Valentine unable to sleep, unable to escape his own sorrow at his current unsatisfied feelings of desire and passion. The verb chase shows how love can be aggressively proactive in ensuring insomnia amongst its clientele. Clearly, one disrespects the concept or abstract being of love at one's peril. Valentine confides in his friend, reveals the secret of his innermost heart, his newly found, and therefore all the more exciting, feelings of deep love, and his daring plan to use a ladder made of cords to rescue Sylvia from her Rapunzel-esque nighttime tower. But how does Proteus respond to this instant renewal of an apparently boundless friendship? He muses, "Methinks my zeal to Valentine is cold, and that I love him not as I was wont." In other words, faced with the dazzling beauty of a woman they both admire, he is prepared to disregard his friend's feelings, which he admits shows a degree of callousness on his own part. He makes a feeble attempt to restrain himself, but the final line of the scene gives a horrible hint about his future plans. "If I can check my erring love, I will. If not, to compass her, I'll use my skill." The adjective erring shows that Proteus knows what he is contemplating is wrong, but the fact he ends his soliloquy suggesting he will use his cunning to obtain compass Sylvia shows that he is prepared to jeopardize a lifelong friendship on the strong, momentary impulse of sexual desire and the male need to possess. Shakespeare appears to be showing the truth of John Lyley's proverb from Euphues, written slightly earlier than this play. All is fair in love and war. Act 2, Scene 6 of the Two Gentlemen of Verona is entirely devoted to Proteus as he continues to contemplate his growing feelings for Sylvia and how action on his part will betray both his friend Valentine and Julia, the woman he professed to love so much in Act 2, Scene 2 that he demanded to be tormented if he should forget to sigh for her. In a notable part of his soliloquy, he attempts to unravel his dilemma. I cannot leave to love, and yet I do. But there I leave to love where I should love. Julia I lose, and Valentine I lose. If I keep them, I needs must lose myself. In these highly ornate lines, Proteus recognises again that his thoughts and desires are immoral. He is leaving, ceasing to love the person he should be loving, Julia. However, he feels that failing to act on his passions for Sylvia will result in a loss of his own identity. I needs must lose myself. His feelings are so strong, his love so overwhelming, that denying it will crush his personality, so that he will no longer be himself. Shakespeare shows how friendship can be sacrificed at the altar of selfish desire and the need for egotistical conquest to preserve a man's sense of self or self-worth. Rather like contestants desperate for fame on reality TV shows such as Big Brother, Proteus seems prepared to do literally anything to achieve his goal. Ironically, his ruthless, selfish streak comes at the same time as Julia is on her way to Milan to see him, disguised as a man Rosalind style for protection against the loose encounters of lascivious men. Julia's confidence in his constancy is absolute. She tells her waiting woman Lucetta that his words are bond, his oaths are oracles. Oracles enable listeners to receive wise advice from the gods, and so this metaphor shows that Julia has an almost religious faith in the promises her man has made her. Having been confided in that Valentine will use a ladder to free Sylvia from the Duke's castle before fleeing with her, Proteus promptly reveals the entire plan to Sylvia's father in Act 3, Scene 1. Attempting to explain away his oily disloyalty, he reasons, "Thus, for my duty's sake, I rather chose to cross my friend in his intended drift than by concealing it heap on your head a pack of sorrows which would press you down, being unprevented, to your timeless grave." Proteus ingratiatingly talks of his duty to the Duke, the play's equivalent to a king, and to whom Elizabethans would have expected unquestioning submission and loyalty as God's representative on earth. He shows his skill by packing his greasy lines with relentless emotive imagery, arguing that the Duke would be so traumatised by his daughter's disobedient escape with Valentine that it would be a terribly heavy burden to bear, resulting in his premature death. To paraphrase Lear's ultimately disastrous intentions in Act 1, Scene 1 of King Lear, Proteus claims that without his intervention, the Duke could end up crawling, burdened, towards death. And so the Duke duly intercepts Valentine as he pitches up with his hidden ladder and banishes him forthwith. The latter has no idea that Proteus has been the cause of his downfall and tries to take some false drops of comfort from his friend. Proteus offers these consoling lines. "Time is the nurse and breeder of all good. Hope is a lover's staff. Walk hence with that and manage it against despairing thoughts." Proteus uses breathtakingly banal and largely meaningless metaphors to fob his friend off. By suggesting time is the nurse, he is suggesting that with time, Valentine's pain will heal, whilst a reference to hope being a staff, a long, strong stick used as a support when walking, brings home the fact that his friend may well be so shell-shocked by what has happened that he may struggle to remain upright, and yet should let hopes for the future sustain him. These are the same hopes for the future that Proteus aims to smash to smithereens by stealing Sylvia from him in his enforced absence. In the character of Proteus, Shakespeare has created an old-fashioned villain who shows the potential pitfalls of revealing too much to a friend, of trusting another person too much, a person who may well have hopes and desires of their own that are too similar to yours for comfort. Shakespeare is also exposing the uncomfortable truth that, for so many of us, the conventional rules of friendship simply do not apply and can be disregarded when it comes to making love matches. Within the hierarchy of civilization, and especially within today's society, there is no question that romantic love is positioned well above its occasional rival, platonic friendship. When Proteus hurriedly talks of time potentially acting as a nurse to the banished Valentine, he's just saying the expected words of a friend who recognises another man is in a bad situation and could probably do with some comfort. However, in Act 3, Scene 2, the Duke also brings up the concept of time, bringing about positive change. He reassures Sir Thurio about his daughter. This weak impress of love is as a figure trenched in ice, which with an hour's heat dissolves to water, and doth lose its form. A little time will melt her frozen thoughts. The Duke's words remind the audience of the potential conflicts that can arise between parents, fathers in particular, and their children when it comes to matters of love. Whereas his daughter Sylvia will later show her love for Valentine by concocting a daring plan to escape Milan to be with him, her father is convinced that her feelings are insubstantial, are weak imitations of the real thing, and that with time she will be easily won over. He stresses what he believes to be the temporary status of Sylvia's feelings for Valentine with a simile linking her to an ice figure, which will quickly melt with the heat of either warm weather or another man's amorous advances. Shakespeare shows how difficult it can be to interpret feelings of love from the outside. Only those experiencing its hot fire can attempt to judge the genuineness of feelings and its potential permanence. Sir Thurio is utterly incapable of melting Sylvia's frozen thoughts and develops what he will probably consider a useful friendship with Proteus, a man who seems decent and willing to help him out. However, the latter continues to plummet new depths of faithlessness in friendship in Act 3, Scene 2, when he argues, "The best way is to slander Valentine with falsehood, cowardice and poor descent, three things that women highly hold in hate." In these lines, Proteus advocates lying shamelessly about the friend he has spent so many enjoyable hours with since infancy. Moreover, the fact that his advice about lying is so specific, you should attack Valentine about his lack of bravery and inferior bloodline, as well as other general lies, indicates that these words cannot be excused as delivered in the heat of the moment. No. These are calculated, planned, carefully thought out words. Proteus has become so fixated on his project to win Sylvia that he is prepared to use any method possible to achieve his means. He's already helped to banish his friends and ushered him out of the city as quickly as possible, but here he goes further by suggesting horribly underhand tactics to a love rival that he hopes will ultimately benefit himself and enable him to betray another supposed comrade and friend. Shakespeare shows how desire for love can result in a ruthless loss of human decency, leaving the reputations and memories of friends savagely betrayed. For Proteus doesn't just suggest trying to falsely discredit Valentine's character, but he quickly offers to take on the job himself. Initially, he shows an understanding of how good friends would be expected to behave towards each other by showing apparent reluctance to betray. He says to the Duke, "And that, my lord, I shall be loath to do. 'Tis an ill office for a gentleman, especially against his very friends." Proteus recognises that both the Duke and Sir Thurio are likely to get suspicious if he seems too keen to engineer a relationship between someone he's only recently met and the loved one of an old dear friend of his. Moreover, such behaviour is likely to result in the viewers adopting a dim viewer of his own integrity and character. Such enthusiasm to be disloyal can come across as unsavoury, even towards a Duke who will be used to ingratiating obedience. Friendships, both in today's world and Shakespeare's, matter. We don't like the idea of a friendship not being sufficiently valued, of one friend turning against another. An apt comparison could be made with the exchange between Oliver and Duke Frederick in Act 3, Scene 1 of As You Like It. Oliver rushes to betray his brother and reveals all too readily, "I never loved my brother in my life." And this admission only results in greater censure from the Duke. "More villain thou! Well, push him out of doors." By seeming reluctant to act in a way which will slur his friend's character, Proteus is seen as a man of more integrity than Oliver in As You Like It. He's not prepared to discredit willy-nilly or admit that he doesn't love or care for someone he should. Shakespeare shows the fine line within Elizabethan society. On the one hand, obedience, loyalty, and a degree of flattery would be expected towards your social superior. However, excessive sycophancy, especially at the expense of your own family or close friends, would be frowned upon and suggest shallowness, insubstantiality of character, suggests someone not to be trusted. But after his apparent initial reluctance, Proteus readily agrees to go to Sylvia with the stated aim of getting her to hate young Valentine and love Thurio, though of course he has no intention of completing the second part of the agreement. And so Act 4, Scene 2 shows Proteus speaking to Sylvia, and in their exchange Shakespeare shows that although friendship can be inconstant, there are those in love who can remain steadfastly loyal and faithful. Shocked to the core by Proteus's blatant treachery to his friend, Sylvia unleashes a string of abusive adjectives to show her disdain for this man now trying to win her love. She cries, "Thou subtle, perjured, false, disloyal man! Think'st thou I am so shallow, so conceitless, to be seduced by thy flattery, that has deceived so many with thy vows?" It is clear that flowery compliments and a sweet tone of voice are often not enough to win a woman's heart. Sylvia is able to look through Proteus's obsequiousness and recognise that, although he has been treacherously cunning about it, subtle, a man who can perjure a friend to such a huge extent, and the strength of the verb perjure, meaning to lie in a law court, indicates she believes his betrayal is of a criminal extent, cannot be trusted, let alone loved. But this scene reveals the constancy of women in love in another way. For Julia, Proteus's first love is listening on, unseen and disguised. Just as the disguised Viola in Twelfth Night gives the audience an insight into her own agonised feelings of love through lines about her father's daughter with a great and yellow melancholy, sitting like Patience on a monument, smiling at grief, so we sympathise similarly with Julia, who is unable to reveal her identity or maintain a proactive approach to love due to restrictive Elizabethan conventions about the roles of men and women. Whereas Viola is at least able to reveal her feelings directly to Orsino in Twelfth Night through her clever use of the phrase father's daughter, although of course Orsino doesn't realise she is talking about herself. Julia has no such crumbs of comfort and instead appeals to the audience in a series of asides. Following rejections about her own death, yes, Proteus does stoop that low. She follows on from Proteus's gush to Sylvia that to her painting, her shadow would I make true love. She says, "If I twere a substance, you would sure deceive it and make it but a shadow, as I am." Julia's suffering and depressive low mood is self-evident in these morose lines. On the one hand, she's learned to her own cost how Proteus is an excellent liar and can fool both women, love rivals, friends and dukes about his real motives. However, she is now able to reflect on the impact Proteus' deception has had on her. It has transformed her figuratively into a shadow, a mere insubstantial, ghostly silhouette of her past vigour and vivacity. What makes Julia all the more shadow ghost-like is her disguise, which means that her usual physical appearance is absent and can play no part in jolting Proteus away from his selfish hounding of Sylvia. Shakespeare reveals the relative powerlessness of the female lover faced with male unreliability. Just as Adriana worries, perhaps heedlessly, in the Comedy of Errors, that her husband Antipholus feeds from home, yet knows she can do little about it. So Julia, in Act 4, Scene 2 of the Two Gentlemen of Verona, watches her Proteus do everything in his power to engage himself to another woman, and can only go home to reflect on the longest night that e'er I watched, and the most heaviest. The superlative longest and heaviest reveal all. This evening has turned out to be the most wretched of Julia's entire existence. One of the great ironies of the play is that there is initially much talk of noble male friendship. In Act 1, Scene 1, Proteus tells Valentine piously that should he ever get into trouble, "I will be thy beadsman." Beadsman refers to the beads of the rosary, suggesting that Proteus will be his friend's prayer maker and supporter in chief, whatever the circumstance. In Act 2, Scene 4, Valentine shows a similar devotion to his friends, to rave to the Duke how his friend has an experience old, judgment ripe. He is complete in feature and in mind. However, it is actually the solidarity between two women who barely know each other which comes closest to representing the values of loyalty and faithfulness that you would associate with genuine friendship. In Act 4, Scene 2, Sylvia reminds Proteus of his previous vows to Julia and orders explicitly, "Return, return, and make thy love amends." The repeated dance-like imperatives return, show the hopping mad urgency of both Sylvia's desire to reject and also remind Proteus of the woman he had previously presumably prattled on about, Julia. Sylvia maintains this sympathetic stance towards a fellow woman, and in Act 4, Scene 4, Julia reflects that her love rival is a virtuous gentlewoman, mild and beautiful. "I hope my master's suit will be but cold, since she respects my mistress's love so much." The adjectives virtuous, mild and beautiful show Julia's appreciation of Sylvia's character and personal appearance, whilst the reference to herself as "my mistress" shows how she continues to feel displaced, both as a disguised man, but also living in a world in which she can no longer rely upon her previous persona's confident assumptions. Shakespeare shows both the importance of solidarity amongst women of the same sex when it comes to forming relationships, and the paralysing effect unexpected rejection can have on assassinating strongly held beliefs and ideas about your own identity. The final scene of the play raises some uncomfortable questions about both the nature of love and friendship. Sylvia continues to witheringly reject Proteus's advances and tells him in no uncertain terms, "Had I been seized by a hungry lion, I would have been a breakfast to a beast rather than have false Proteus rescue me." In other words, Sylvia would prefer to have her body ripped and shredded to pieces, to be eaten alive, to die an agonising death, than be rescued by Proteus. The strength and consistency of Sylvia's rejections finally take their toll on Proteus, and he decides to take a different approach altogether, revealing a so far unseen side to his generally, on the surface, civilised character. He growls, "Nay, if the gentle spirit of moving words can no way change you to a milder form, I'll woo you like a soldier, at arm's length, and love you against the nature of love. Force ye, I'll force thee, yield to my desire." The simile suggesting that Proteus will win Sylvia like a soldier is sinister and utterly anti-romantic. Just as a soldier will fight and use violence to achieve victory in battle, so Proteus is now prepared to do the same to conquer the object of his desire. The subsequent repeated verbs force confirm the audience's first impression of Proteus's plans following the alarming warfare simile, namely that Proteus will physically manhandle, possibly even rape Sylvia, to satisfy his frustrated desires. She has become an opponent to be defeated, rather than a human being with hopes and desires of her own that should also be respected. Proteus knows that such an act is unnatural. It is against the nature of love, and runs contrary to the spirit of what love should stand for, qualities such as mutual consideration, mutual shared feelings, mutual affections and support. However, just as Proteus's earlier soliloquies about whether he should remain loyal to Julia and Valentine invariably led to selfish conclusions, so here he chooses to ignore moral scruples in an attempt to get what he wants. Proteus's behaviour raises alarming questions about the nature of male love and to what extent loving hyperbolic words can hide hidden lust and sexual cravings. Alone on stage earlier in the play, Proteus describes Sylvia as a celestial sun made fair by heaven and too holy. The examples show him elevating Sylvia well beyond the confines of humanity to a godlike or other planet status. On the one hand, these examples emphasise the female's great beauty, but they also suggest that there is something utterly and frighteningly unattainable about her. How can we, to use a crude example, ever get someone who represents the angel-like sun to return our advances if we happen to fall in love with her? She is not just out of our proverbial league, but out of our entire stratosphere. And so we are left with a strange situation in which men repeatedly position female objects of desire on a plateau which, by their own definitions, they can never reach. If Proteus, like Romeo in Romeo and Juliet, genuinely meant his earlier, impossibly hyperbolic descriptions of Sylvia, he would never have attempted to use violence to achieve his means. Such an act would be sacrilegious, figuratively against God. And so we are left with the uncomfortable conclusion about male perceptions of women. Men worship the beauty of the fairer sex and are incredibly sexually attracted to it, and I say it rather than them deliberately. However, should male desires be thwarted, some men can feel that their yearning to become so strong that they must be satisfied, in spite of the lack of female acquiescence. Shakespeare shows the problems of largely viewing women in terms of their beauty. They become objects rather than fully rounded human beings who can offer a little more than sex during their everyday human interactions. Sylvia is fortunate that someone she genuinely loves is on hand to protect her, Valentine. He has seen the entire scene, watched his so-called friend first make verbal love to his loved one and then attempt force physical love. He shows the pain of being treacherously betrayed when he asks in disbelief, "Who should be trusted when one's right hand is perjured to the bosom?" Valentine's metaphor indicates just how much he valued his past friendship with Proteus. He felt he was a part of his very body. And the reference to right hand has religious connotations, conjuring up images of Jesus sitting at the right hand of God. And these men are so close that they are spiritually one and the same. Now, there would appear to be some exaggeration here, as the audience have seen little evidence of such a close bond. And such exaggeration is no doubt prompted naturally by Valentine witnessing with his own eyes Proteus betraying him so blatantly. However, Proteus's shamefaced reaction, "My shame and guilt confounds me," does imply that he acknowledges that he had a close friendship with Valentine. Whether or not that friendship was intimate enough to deserve the right-hand metaphor is largely irrelevant. Shakespeare is showing the torturous pain and hurt that can ensue when the values of friendship are overturned by the egotistical desires of lust masquerading as love. Valentine shows his respect for his friends by not just accepting his apology, but by proclaiming, "And that my love may appear plain and free, all that was mine in Sylvia I give thee." In this context, love refers to Valentine's platonic love for Proteus, his valuing of their friendship. And whereas Proteus's early actions implied that he positioned sexual love for a woman far above platonic love for a friend, Valentine's words here show the opposite. He appreciates Proteus's friendship so much, he's prepared to give up his interest, his stake in Sylvia, and pass her on to the man who a few seconds ago seemed hell-bent on raping her. These words raise a number of issues, especially for a modern audience. The phrase, "I give thee," referring to his previous relationship and claims on Sylvia, is almost magisterial in tone, suggesting that in love men feel they can potentially distribute women amongst themselves as they please, once again implying that women are little more than glorified, albeit angelic, objects. Moreover, the fact that Valentine is prepared to make such an offer, having seen how Proteus had spine-chillingly bellowed at Sylvia, "Oh, force thee, yield to my desire," undermines the whole concept of romantic love. What is the use of getting yourself banished from a city, of being forced to become an outlaw, if the reason this all occurred is so insubstantial that you can give it up in a split second? The modern audience would doubtless find these moments in the play a little strange, as platonic friendship is not valued as highly as it would have been in Shakespeare's day. However, there are other alternative interpretations for Valentine's apparently baffling offer. Is Shakespeare parodying the whole concept of idealised friendship by painting such a wildly improbable scenario that we are forced to conclude that, in real life as opposed to in drama, perfection in friendship is frankly impossible? That there will always be awkward moments in life where you may have to go against the wishes of a friend, where you may have conflicting wishes that may linger beneath or above the surface? Or is Shakespeare using this extreme example to make a case for the traditional, good old-fashioned Christian values of forgiveness? There is perhaps some truth in both of these interpretations. Nonetheless, Julia's subsequent swooning and revelation of her real identity means that there is no need for Proteus to respond to his friend's startling offer. Viewing the original object of his love is sufficient to quench his previous desire and lust for Sylvia. And so the play ends with two marriages, Valentine to Sylvia and Proteus to Julia. As is traditional in a Shakespearean comedy, the women are given few lines to voice their feelings about these events. Aptly so, given that in married life, in public at least, their voices will not be of great significance. So we don't know how Julia feels about marrying the man who so quickly fell in love with another woman after changing cities, and how Sylvia feels about a lifetime with a man who was so quick to offer her up in favour of his friends. The mood at the end of the play, though, is certainly celebratory, with Valentine crying ceremoniously that there will be one feast, one house, one mutual happiness. Perhaps Shakespeare is saying that in love, as well as in friendship, things are rarely perfect. We are human beings. We make mistakes. We make misjudgments, especially us men. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't forgive both our friends and our prospective partners. This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare production, exploring the relationship between love and friendship in The Two Gentlemen of Verona. Thanks for watching.